Almost there. We're gonna be okay. I love you. Both of you.
We love you too. Oh my God!
On the day the world ended, nobody knew that the nuclear hellfire that rained down first would be the least of their concerns. As the sky opened up, a rain would quite literally fall for 4 days straight, which would prove to be a bit of a problem. If you watched my first episode, then you were quite aware at this point that when you were exposed to radiation, you were totally screwed. Thanks for watching. As the water fell, it would then have the horrific habit of carrying radioactive dust into the crevices of the planet where people were hiding. This would absolutely sterilize the surface at that time, and as we all know, animals need water, plants need water, everything needs water, and with basically all of Earth's water resources contaminated, this would ensure that the next few thousand years would have everything be irradiated and cancer-inducing. But according to the great doctor some time ago, life finds a way, and as time would pass, despite the scouring of the world above, people would come out of their caves and sewers, and also vaults, I guess, to find that the world that they once knew was completely gone. But what do you do at that point? Undoubtedly, many would take the easier path and engage in riding the sewer slide in order to not live in this tainted world anymore. But others would see no other option than to just rebuild. But rebuilding would come with its own complications for those who were constantly exposed. One of these complications would be ghoulification, and the other is the inevitable downfall of their own physiology and a changing of their metabolisms during the process of feralization. As those people who were struggling to survive in the wastes, drinking the water that was highly radioactive, and dealing with what I can only assume is an absolutely horrific joke, a land anglerfish in Appalachia, I want off this rock. You're telling me these things have feet and hands? Ugh. Slowly over time, people's exposure would cause their bodies to begin to change if they were not already changed by the radiation around them from the initial blasts. If you would like more information about the ghoulification process, there is a part 1 of this video. I may put them together later if you guys want that, but for now, as mentioned, without fail, ghouls eventually go completely feral. But what is this process? What organs fail to do their jobs that likely is caused just by the outright damage that they have incurred? What is this process that takes place that does this? And how do their brains degrade, as well as ultimately their bodies just subsisting off radiation? Well, let's discuss all that in today's episode, covering the feral ghouls from the Fallout games, and then I suppose the TV show as well. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. Are you ready to have fresh, never frozen meals delivered directly to your door, all with over 35 options, including Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie? Well, if you are, then look no further. It's no secret that the passage of time is a nightmare. However, what hasn't been a nightmare is I have been working with Factor for over 4 years now because I actually eat their meals. And let me tell you something, nutrition is the foundation of success. I went to the gym today. I was throwing around 120-pound dumbbells, 3 sets, 8 reps on chest press. 4 years ago, I was hitting 70s thinking that was amazing. But with good nutrition provided by Factor, instilling healthy eating habits and plenty of nutrition, I'm starting to hit the big times over here, at least according to me. And it's all because Factor eliminated the hassle of prepping food, cooking, and cleaning up. So, it's just kind of easier to do that than order out or cook something from scratch. Just pop them in the microwave for 2 minutes and you have a highly nutritious meal ready to eat. So if you are ready to hit your goals this summer as that approaches, because it's almost upon us, then head to factor75.com and use code 50Roanoke to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. All right, let's get back to it. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. Without you guys, none of this would even be possible, and I do appreciate your support. I'm streaming over on Twitch under Roanoke Games, also on YouTube on Roanoke Games. We will be live streaming on Roanoke Gaming for members. Usually, I'm thinking about possibly playing Subnautica over there, so if you want to check that out, cool. Check out Roanoke Tales for cryptids and true crime stuff, and head over to the Discord where we watch movies that end up here. Links for everything in the description. So, we kick off our story where we should. Not necessarily the beginning, but the middle beginning, because after feralization, that's where the real lifespan increase comes from. A ghoul will begin to show signs and symptoms of coming issues as time continues to pass, but this may be delayed for a time given outside intervention or an understanding of what can happen. What's wild is we actually see this currently with humanity now quite regularly. We just really don't have the same factors contributing to it. Ghouls, being radiation resistant or immune as some think, can exist in highly radioactive environments for a fair amount of time. But as we all know, radiation is undefeated in the parking lot. Even with this protection to their genome, it still goes back to the same issue that affected humans to make ghouls: indirect radiation versus direct radiation. Indirect radiation never strikes the genome, and instead it heats up the water in the cell that then goes on to break the backbone of the DNA, which in turn causes a shredding of the genome. The body may attempt to fix this, but this process is quite extensive. How extensive, I can hear you asking? Well, I'm glad you asked. The cell may attempt a repair of complete breaks, or a double-stranded break as they are known, through two mechanisms, but this in no way assures it's going to happen correctly: homologous recombination and non-homologous end joining. Homologous recombination relies on at least some of the DNA to be present to serve as a template. It will break down one of the broken DNA strands into smaller pieces and then find the complementary sequence that fits with it. From here, this template is used to rebuild the broken strand. It is entirely possible several mistakes could happen during this, but this is all in all the preferred method. However, a preference after nuclear hellfire event is very unlikely. The other method is more risky, but to save the genome, it has to be done. Non-homologous end joining will act completely separate of a template and instead will utilize ligase to join the broken ends of the DNA. I can hear you saying it now. But Roanoke, wouldn't this lead to errors such as insertion and deletions at the repair site? Yes, it's not that great. Genes can be regularly broken during this process, and let's just say if it happens to take place at, the P51 gene, this fix is highly likely to result in cancer. The important thing to remember is homologous recombination is more precise and restores the original sequence and is preferred, but it's also slower because the template is present. Non-homologous end joining straight up refuses the ends of the DNA utilizing ligase. Now, is refusing the correct word, or possibly just fusing? Probably just fusing. Now, why is this such an issue though? Well, let's say your genome is broken in several spots. It's not 100% known to your body where exactly the breaks connect up to another broken end. So let's say if there are 3 broken parts, 1, 2, 3, it may inadvertently actually fuse them back together in a 2, 1, 3 configuration, which would not be great. Now, you do get around 10 to 50 of these events per cell per day, so it's not like it's an unknown to your body, but this is the issue with indirect radiation, because here comes direct radiation with the chair. Direct radiation smacks into the nucleotides directly and the phosphate backbone as well, which can actually remove entire nucleotides from the coding. And if this happens, all while your body is contending with several double-strand breaks, genes are very clearly going to be lost. Mutations would arise, and ultimately, this would put your repair mechanisms under a tremendous amount of stress. And this is what was leading to people to drop from radiation exposure as large swaths of skin were lost and their bodies just broke down after exposure due to apoptosis. For those that actually went full-on ghoul, their bodies mutated in a way to help them resist the effects of radiation, but it would not be a perfect scenario. They were still very much so susceptible to the radiation that was in their environment, which, given their genetic instability, would actually lead them to further mutating into another form of life. Now, back to the process of resisting fertilization. It is known that there are ways in which a ghoul can delay the process, but ultimately, due to the genetic damage they have incurred, they will acquire fertilization regardless. Many ghouls have tried in varying temporary success, I guess you could call it. All but a handful have failed completely to stave it off. Mostly this involves neuroplasticity of the brain and avoiding areas of high radiation yield for what I believe to be several reasons. Let's start first with neuroplasticity. It is a known human error, I guess you can say. Well, not really human error, but our body's error, that without socialization, our brains suffer. Now, invariably, I'll get somebody in the comments saying, "Oh, I don't need to socialize, and I'm fine being alone forever." But no man or woman is an island. You are not fine forever. Our brains require socialization. It's not suggested. You have to have. This is like saying you don't need water or food. It's not how you're built. And I mean, even getting some, maybe just like an hour a day, is preferable over nothing. We see the effects of this lack of socialization actually within the elderly. It's pretty standard that as we age through life, the amount of friends that we have will decrease the longer that we go, and this is due to random events such as people falling out socially, deaths, or just life events in general. Time has a way of socially isolating everyone at this current era of humanity, mainly because we're probably just supposed to be in like small knit communities, like within a cave with one another trying to survive. So even if we get older, we still have people around us, but we look nothing socially like our biology has set us up for, at least concerning now. And because of this, the elderly will typically be confined to either like homes or hospitals, waiting for the inevitable end. And depending on what kind of person you are, family and remaining friends may or may not visit. It's a cold hard fact of life, and over time, It has been studied and noted that this can lead to a decrease in functioning of the brain, and this is called outright depression. But at this age, it quite literally is, if you don't use it, you literally lose it. While not directly causing brain cell death, a reduction in brain volume has been noticed along with a decline in cognitive functioning. Dementia tends to progress at this point, and now you may not be able to completely avoid it, but social interactions can help prolong the functionality of a brain and overall protect the brain's health. And this is due to the fact that if you sit alone, the brain has a massive decrease in neurochemicals being sent back and forth. Cells just kind of sit there without much to do, so no new connections need to be made to strengthen the brain. This leads to a decrease overall, which then reaches a tipping point after a certain amount of time has passed. Meanwhile, socialization does help bolster the brain and keep it healthy, allowing for these new connections to be made because they are important within the gray matter, and as a result, the brain will function at a more stable level, allowing for the person to maintain their own personality and actually raise the perceived quality of life through increased dendritic connections between neurons, which socialization is known to promote. Relating it back to the ghouls, this is the main issue they suffer from, seeing as it's already a very much so human problem. Ghouls, who are still cognitively human, are going to be kind of contending with this problem. They have the same thoughts, feelings, and desires, whether that be towards procreation or just outright survival. Also, just as a side note, it should be known that if a ghoul is single-minded and focused, that they can stave off feralization even longer, even if they are antisocial. But something that should be noted is while ghouls have the ability to put Percy in the playpen as relating to social ability, and with others just go 20 toes, meiotic ability has entirely ceased due to radiation exposure, leaving them entirely sterile. Only somatic cells remain at this point. Anyhow, so even with all these thoughts and feelings against maybe their own will, for instance, they may end up isolating for one reason or another. Even in low radiation environments, they will still have their brains degrade along the same lines as someone who is elderly struggling with dementia. Dendritic connections will break down over time, and it is known that their overall brain volume also is reduced. This has several effects on their behavior of a ghoul who is going feral, which in turn cascades into other consequences. A ghoul who is turning will begin to become aggressive even if socialization is maintained, and this could be for a multitude of reasons. Let's say you had your friends and family who weren't ghouls 100 years ago, who then all dropped, and now it's just you. You may not be interested in making friends anymore, leading to isolation. You may interact, but it's really not a meaningful connection, and truth be told, the regular humans of the waste aren't typically all that friendly to you anyhow. As a result, a ghoul may tend to isolate or retreat to another area where only ghouls are, but being fundamentally human and having dealt with all of these issues collectively, it's possible most ghouls would not socialize either, and instead are just aggressive humans. Ultimately, this causes a ghoul to begin entering the early stages of feralization, which presents itself, again, as aggressiveness, which if other ghouls want to hang out with you, not great. So as the brain decreases in volume, there is likely a multi-pronged issue that begins to present itself. First, due to the propensity to exist in radioactive environments due to a perceived non-issue, this causes their neurons to be exposed to radiation. This could still outright destroy brain cells over time, accelerating the issue. Second, as the brain decreases in volume, activity also decreases, and they may resort to just repeating patterns. This does not help the brain continue in a functional way, which in turn causes them to begin losing brain matter. Third, all of those lost cells result in the aforementioned aggression, and this is going to drive them to areas decreasing their ability to socialize further, accelerating the degradation of their brains. And fourth, as they are driven into the waste with little food, water, or anything else, and are completely exposed, this pushes them back into these hostile environments with irradiated water sources, other feral ghouls, and in general, solitude. All of this comes together to further make their overall level of brain cells decrease, which ultimately progresses past the point of beginning to go feral with human traits to just full-blown feral. This is the fate of 99.99% of all ghouls. No matter what, they will descend into this state, save for a few that I've read about in the lore that happen to have not gone feral yet despite the timing, but even this does not mean that they will not go feral at some later date in time. They just haven't displayed the symptoms yet. I believe it comes down to the shifting genome, which will alter their metabolisms later. It is known that at first, really, the ghoul cells just contend better with radiation than standard human cells would. I think we need to stress that this does not make them immune, however. Direct strikes to the genome still are going to do damage to the structure and could lead to cellular apoptosis as a result. Their healing factor is just higher, so they can survive this issue. Actually, we went over this more extensively in the first episode if you would like to hear about that. But once that tipping point is reached, the feral ghoul is lost. the frontal lobe has decreased down to a size that emotionally, the person is really no longer able to control themselves. Memories, planning, logical thinking are all gone due to the degradation of the frontal lobe and due to the damage of the cerebrum overall. The person that was once there is just gone. Reduced to an animal in terms of thinking, they will then run purely on instinctual drive. However, interestingly, even in this form, there still are some leftover human traits in there. Feral ghouls will tend to cluster together with one another, although there appears to be no pecking order, so to speak of. This would seem to suggest that socially, they still seek out one another to a degree. However, the three areas of the brain where social behavior is considered to stem from, the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior superior temporal sulcus, and the amygdala, do show that some of these areas here, at least the prefrontal cortex likely being the main one, have degraded to the point that they are really just driven to be not like near one another, but true socialization is not really the goal. However, the other areas, the other two areas of the brain specifically, are probably likely still somewhat intact. So basically, they are driven by instinct of what they once were, which is to be around one another, which from here, we are moving into the discussion of their physiological changes as well as metabolic. So before we head internal to the body, we need to discuss what has continued on externally, which explains why their bodies are trashed internally, I guess you could say. Starting with the feet, we see they are in their regular shape, which is to be expected. The body plan of a feral ghoul is just the same as the humans with an increased healing factor. As we move up the legs, we see that there is very little body fat on them. Almost all of it has either fallen away due to damage of the skin or been used by the body during the ghoul phase of their life cycle. It is likely there may have been some body fat, but once being driven out of the waist, starvation would set in as a result, so their bodies used what they had. Going up to the abdomen, we see typically they come in two forms. It is possible that they could have a sucked in appearance, again due to the lack of body fat and starvation, or they could be bloated as well. Either way, the bloat does not indicate really like a wealth of energy stores, but instead gastroenteritis has set in, inflaming the organs. And this is likely due to the fact that their whole body is just one inflamed mess due to the overproduction of immune cells and the constant attack of viruses and bacteria through the open damage on their skin. Essentially, the innate immune system is signaling everywhere all at once to swell, with the abdominal region also contending with these swelling issues. Not to mention, what they eat would be corrupting the intestines and imparting damage all along the way, scarring them as much as their vocal cords are scarred. As we move up to the thoracic region, and really actually everywhere, we see the same thing. They're very sinewy, again, because of low body fat, but with the ribs, they're either exposed directly or the skin itself is just kind of sucked to them, further indicating malnutrition during their transformation phase. The arms are usually skinnier with very little muscle definition, and as we head down to the hands, we see the fingernails have progressed into claw-like protrusions used to slash at prey and tear it apart. They're literally a product of their environment and are becoming animals. So as we move up to the head, there may or may not be some hair strands, but the hair follicles, for the most part, like the skin, is pretty much destroyed. The teeth have been filed down into sharp points, chipped from biting bones and tough meat. The nose is completely gone, lost from when they were just a ghoul, and the ears are gone as well. Over time, through radiation exposure, the more delicate organs have become affected. The eyes are now bioluminescent, or at least they have a bioluminescent glow to them, which we'll talk about here shortly, but the eyes have also developed cataracts. These cataracts are a direct result of energy exposure that they have been dealing with, being, again, radiation. The proteins of the lenses of the eyes will usually break down naturally over time, like in real life, more so with prolonged exposure to UV light, which then causes them to become cloudy. This ultimately clouds the vision of the feral ghoul, making it difficult for them to see. So we also begin to see the first signs of what's happening internally that then further shifts the metabolism away from human into something else. The eyes are beginning to glow yellow, and this shows that at this point, radiation is actually starting to build up in the body to the point that a physical glow is spotted. So this glow is due to one major reason: what the ghouls are consuming, whether it be meat or water. Being out in the wasteland, their ghoulish form still has to eat, slowly exposing them over time. Now that they are feral, they will eat quite literally anything, no matter the irradiation level, and this has, from what I've seen, had two effects. The first effect is this causes the radiation to build up in the body, but the second effect is this could further induce mutations in the genetic coding of the body itself. And this highlights the shift into the glowing one, as it's known, because it's another beneficial mutation to keep the ghoul alive. As the ghoul was starving and radiation was building up, a forced adaptation takes place that will forever alter the life support function that the body has, which at first would appear to be completely detrimental. As damage is built up through the exposure, the internal organs and systems in place are incurring the same exact damage. The only reason they aren't falling outright is due to the ghoul's adaptation of increased mitosis. However, we can assume the scarring on the outside is also taking place on the inside. The issue with scarring is that it becomes less effective as a tissue. Take the small intestine, intestine, for instance. As the ghoul eats, tracks of scars would form if the food is irradiated enough, and this causes that area of the intestine to no longer take in the nutrition it needs, leading to a slow starvation over time. As this process hits a critical point, starvation is all but assured, and given that the feral ghouls run on instinct, this would trigger them to become absolutely rabid to consume anything they can, given the intestinal damage, but in the end, the mutations in their DNA and the shutting down of systems ultimately saves their body, if you can call it that. As a feral ghoul is on the cusp of wasting away, their body will make a critical shift. It is at this point the kidneys have given up completely and shut down, which was critical to their survival as a ghoul. Blood is directly filtered by the kidneys using millions of tiny units called nephrons. These nephrons work to filter out waste products and excess water to keep the body functioning appropriately. Now, what would it be actually trying to filter out at this point? Pretty much everything left over from the battle that's taken place, from all of the microbes invading, but also it's trying to filter out radioactive isotopes or anything that is radioactive in the bloodstream. So these nephrons would work to filter out this waste, which would cause so much scarring and damage that the blood can no longer be filtered properly. As the ghoul continues to eat and not really gain all that much nutrition, in fact, gaining less and less nutrition because it's causing more and more damage, this causes radiation to directly build up in the bloodstream. And as this builds up, it will collect in the body, and the most obvious place that it can be seen first is the vitreous fluid of the eyes, causing them to glow yellow. As this process continues, the body itself will build up higher and higher radiation levels with less and less nutrition as a runaway event begins. It is at this point that the body will adapt once more to its surroundings, likely due to the interference by high radiation levels themselves, and this will invariably result in the glowing one if it survives long enough. Glowing ones are unique and fairly rare for a good reason. Technically speaking, glowing ones have mutated to the point where they do not need to eat, and instead they are fueled by the radiation that has built up in their bodies. They could essentially exist for an exceedingly long period of time just hanging out in irradiated areas. However, old habits die hard, and as a result, they will still attack other ghouls and humans, which then can lead to their end. Which I bet you thought we were just gonna gloss over how they survive off radiation. Absolutely not. Because we see this process can take place right now on a biological level, and it's incredibly interesting. And for this, we need to talk about fungi. According to the theory of evolution, fungi and plants split roughly about, we'll say, 1 billion years ago from a common ancestor. Plants and animals and fungi all had a common ancestor around 1.5 to 2 billion years ago, given that we were all eukaryotes. I find fungi in particular interesting as it's almost a combination of plant and animal, given how it is also more closely related to animals than it is to plants. Fungi and animals both possess chitin to actually make exoskeletons, at least concerning arthropods. Fungi and animals can both be multi or unicellular, both do not have chloroplasts, and both are incapable of making their own food. Well, I mean, plants can use photosynthesis anyways, but yeah. Until we actually discovered something rather interesting, and for that we need to head over to Chernobyl. Chernobyl is kind of a strange thing because it's confirming a lot of things that we thought about radiation, and it's also disproving a lot of things that we thought about radiation. And one of the largest ones being, it is going down in terms of levels of radiation way faster than we originally expected. Now, a lot of this has to do actually with wildlife resilience. Turns out radiation can be survived long-term to a degree, and this is mainly seen in those who were exposed, who did not seem to have the expected long-term consequences we thought they would. That's not to say that the long-term consequences don't exist at all. Also, there are still no-go zones there if you visit it, so be careful and watch your Geiger counter. But interestingly, there's actually a fungus growing there that seems to be shifting our understanding of what food actually is. Cladosporium sperospermum has been found in Chernobyl, and it is quite literally bawling out on nuclear radiation. It is an all-you-can-eat buffet for this species, and this fungus uses melanin adaptation, which is the pigmentation found in our species that produces skin color, that can absorb gamma radiation and then convert it into energy directly in an event known as radiosynthesis. So you see the importance here. Gamma radiation is one of the scariest side effects of nuclear bombs for the simple fact that it pierces structures and destroys genomes. I think you need like a foot of lead and like 3 feet of concrete to stop it. But with this fungus having adapted to the ionizing radiation, turning it into energy for its cell, it no longer needs to break down organic material, and it's decreasing the amount of gamma radiation that leaks out of the area by eating it. This black fungus was found on the walls of Reactor 4, which was the most radioactive reactor. This should be a sterilized zone by all accounts, and yet here is this fungus. This is the same thing I believe is happening with the glowing ones. And this also kind of confirms that if we did nuke ourselves into oblivion, the Earth is just gonna turn black, because if we sterilize everything else, this fungus is just gonna have a field day. So as these cells mutated through the increasing radiation levels, some cells may have taken on this form of adaptation. It has happened in a species more closely related to animals than plants, then it may be possible that it could happen in animals as well. As the glowing one has swaths of cells die off, generational adaptation internal to its body would kick into overdrive. Eventually, an adaptation would form in the presence of a mass die-off of its own body. As the ionizing radiation in its body builds up, it would strike the melanin and allow for it to be turned into usable energy. No longer would the body be reliant on mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, but instead it could now use radiation to power its organelles and functions. After this adaptation was created by the body, the old cells of the feral ghoul would die off. The once human cells shifted into this new form and then utilized an entirely new form of energy as a result. This would be, at this point, I think it's going to make them a completely new species from Homo sapiens. We get sapiens from our ability to think, which is our defining feature, and the defining feature of a glowing one would be a completely new form of metabolism for an animal. We'll call it Homo radiosynths. Likely, that could be a name used at this point to identify this creature. They aren't thinking as well as us, but they are surviving quite well with this new metabolism. This ultimately has made them entirely fit for the environment, whereas humans are just barely hanging on. Nature continued on even when most of it was destroyed, just in a way that was not expected. Ultimately, I think the glowing ones are sort of an endpoint, and it works well for now. While they have been bussed down to animal intelligence, given humanity's warlike nature, we sort of did it to ourselves. The issue is, while these creatures are sterile, they can survive for what is assumed to be indefinitely. Without radiation, however, they will most definitely starve. If humanity can find a way to actually make ourselves into glowing ones without losing our brains, and we could probably use the genetic profile that they have, it is entirely possible that our species could once again dominate the planet and maybe even go into space to survive direct exposure to our sun, as our bodies would actually adapt to using, again, the sun for food, which I think is a very interesting concept, but we'll wrap that up there. I want to thank you guys for watching. What do you think about my kind of discussion of the ferals and the glowing ones? Do you think it's an endpoint, or will they continue evolving? It'd be cool if human intellect was regained. I just kind of doubt it. Let me know down in the comments. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games links. This is basically where I stream, in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the astrophysicist tier, we have Death's Dancer. Thank you, man. At the full-fledged scientist tier, we have Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, Stutz, and the victorious return of Chad, the enjoyer of scientific explanations of B-grade horror movies. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It keeps everything running smoothly, so thank you, absolute ballers. All right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.